がマジョリかああいう感じすんで。
Well, if the looking for a movie is canonical, then yeah, you are gonna turn back into that form every time, like Daxter or something. Cold opener for this one went into full symbolism mode, with the Ojamajo saying farewell to both their taps and the show. For these girls, they were witches no more. Oh, how very poignant. By the way, who left this Spider-Man costume here? But yeah, obviously things weren't going well as Screech had busted them and led a big unruly mob to the Mahodo. We're a big unruly mob! And now that they were officially witches, the frog rule now fully applied to them, and in a nice callback to the first episode, a drum roll started playing to their impending doom along with some similar camera angles. However, figuring that her charm had one last go on it, Ompu used her new crystal to make everyone forget about the entire day.
ここはどこ?
Now you see, this would happen when y'all drink a little too much of that green beer for St. Patrick's Day, as well as the next few days after. What, is there a law you can't celebrate a little longer? However, either because the bracelet was already useless or she underestimated the feedback of her spell, Ompu was hit with a curse that put her to sleep. And of course, since medical science still hadn't gotten around to discovering cures for magically induced comas, the doctors couldn't do anything. And Ojamajo would later learn that she had gotten not just the feedback from this spell's episode, but also all of the forbidden spells she had used during the season. Because of this, Majorika estimated that she'd be out for at least 20 years. And from there, she would change her name to Shion Nikaido and end up in a Precure knockoff anime. Yes, I am desperately trying to make this a real thing.
魔法少女なのに魔法を使わずほぼ殴り合い
Unfortunately, that wouldn't be the case, as after consulting the queen, they learned that she'd more likely sleep for about 100 years. A rather cruel irony after Ompu had seemingly turned over a new leaf. Fortunately, the magical stage might have been capable of waking her up, but would require them to risk breaking their new crystals in the process. And even if they did succeed, they would have to forfeit their rights to be witches, as yeah, they would essentially be undoing an admittedly deserved punishment for Ompu. I mean, I'll give this queen credit, at least her rulings make sense. Even though she is encouraging them to do illegal activities, but whatever, that's just standard fare for a politician. She estimated that they had about 18 hours before the curse would become unbreakable. During that time, they did at least try to turn Majorika back to normal, but it didn't last due to the immaturity of Doremi's magic. Of course, with enough time, she might have been able to turn her back, but there was still that little issue involving Ompu. Things only got more complicated when the Ojamajo realized that they would also have to say farewell to their fairy partners if they surrendered their witchhood. This led to a very well animated and emotional sequence as the girls and their fairies realized the inevitability. This was very well done, showing the bonds that the Ojamajo have with their fairies. And wait, shouldn't Ompu have a fairy? I think she mentioned having one, but throughout the season, in particular during the test episodes, we never saw it, even though it would be required for several of them. Moreover, it should definitely be around when its master is in a coma, for God's sake. But hey, maybe she just never got one. I mean, wouldn't it be just such a weird little retcon if she suddenly got one after all of this? The next day, they snuck into Ompu's hospital room as butterflies, which might be a clever reference to Zhangzi's butterfly dream parable, considering Ompu was experiencing an endless dream. Whatever, I just want to use this clip.
世界はおしまいだ。
Anyway, seeing Ompu's mother cry at her daughter's bedside was sad, but nothing too gripping as we haven't really gotten to know this character all that much. Not that it really mattered, as the most important takeaway was the Ojamajo contemplating their next course of action based on this. Of course, after all their hard work, giving up on being witches would be a downer, but then they start to realize something as they listed off their witch bucket list. A lot of them were things they could do without magic. And this has been kind of something they've been building up, at least for the last few episodes. I'd say starting from about episode 46, the Ojamajo have been kind of shying away from using magic, instead applying good old practical solutions, like at the Witches Talent Show or when dealing with Aiko's daddy issues. In fact, if anything, their so-called magic would often prove to be more of a hindrance if not an outright nuisance at times. Sure, they used magic to learn that Aiko's mother hadn't actually remarried, but they only came to that misunderstanding in the first place because of that same magic. So really, while it could make certain things easier, magic wasn't necessarily better or worse than what you can pull off with your own two hands.
経験に勝る知識なしってね。
So, after one last Zawaldo, appropriately enough from the yellow member of this team, they took Ompu from her hospital bed to the Mahodo. There, they found Majorika seemingly waiting for them and fully aware of what they needed to do. And she was willing to accept that choice. I gotta say, this Toad has been kind of the understated MVP of the show. Not to disregard our main characters or anything, but for a mentor's side character, Majorika went through a pretty solid arc, all things considered. At the beginning of the series, she is far from a good person, selling potentially dangerous trinkets to her customers. Really, if anything, Doremi discovering that she was a witch was an inevitability, as just the outright shadiness of her job would have led to some sort of investigation. And it was thanks to interacting with the Ojamajo that she started to realize how backwards thinking both her business model and way of life was. Just because she dressed like one didn't mean she needed to act like a nasty witch incapable of making any sort of meaningful relationships with others. She had certainly made some with the little witches she named the Ojamajo and was willing to give up her very humanity for them now. Good stuff. Anyway, in the witch's world, they cast a magical stage to awaken Ompu, but they were short on a little juice. Fortunately, a literal little juice had arrived in the form of Pop joining in on the spell. They pushed their magic to the limit, and after a little crying session that gave them the last burst they needed, they managed to wake their friend up. She then gave them a rather half-hearted thank you. I mean, granted, she just woke up from a coma that could have lasted another century, but come on girl, everyone's crying for you. Show a little more enthusiasm. However, since they had all broken some significant laws, the little witches had to forfeit their wands that were returned to their original forms.
もう二度と会うこともないと思うけど。じゃあ。
Yeah, thanks a lot, lady. I did think my chips needed a little more salt. When they arrived back at the Mahodo, Majorika was already packing her stuff, intending to go live amongst her fellow magical amphibians. She also offered to take care of their fairies.
ロロも後で連れに行くわね。
Who?
Yeah, we'll address that in just a bit. Majorika had also gone ahead, so I guess we're not gonna see her for this big closing sequence, but still, we got a lot of characters to see off, like their classmates and families, especially Ompu's. I mean, we should at least see their reactions to having their daughter back. Oh, and they also should wrap up the bad card subplot, and oh wait, are the ending credits playing? Wait, huh?
Well, that was anticlimactic.
Yeah, you know, if this actually had been the ending to the entire series, God, it would have been disappointing. I mean, don't get me wrong, them sacrificing their magic to save Ompu was perfectly fine and makes absolute sense for the characters. The bigger issue is the fact that this doesn't really feel like a final episode in spite of the massive consequences by the end. The Ojamajo rescued Ompu and then we just kind of ended. No big resolutions or anything to close out the show on a good feeling of finality, just our heroines literally walking off into the sunset. Fortunately though, this wasn't the actual final episode in spite of some initial plans. Ojamajo Doremi was originally slated to just be a one-off, but much like the Magical Girl franchise that would succeeded, the show proved to be a surprise hit, and thus they were greenlit for a few more seasons. I'd imagine the staff learned about this fairly well ahead of this episode, and thus decided to purposely leave a lot of things unconcluded, knowing that they'd just be back the next week. Thus, I can kind of judge this as just another standard episode, and from that perspective, it's pretty good. I mean, it was definitely a solid ending to the whole giving up on magic arc, and from here on out, the writing for this show is going to become a lot sharper. Yeah, I know that was a little forced, but I'm still proud of that pun, okay? If given a proper epilogue, I could have certainly seen this as a worthy conclusion to this series. As I said, there were hints that the Ojamajo were realizing that they didn't really need magic in their lives, which I'm just guessing was an allegory for growing up and leaving behind childhood fantasies. Obviously, that's not going to be the case, for now at least. Yeah, while I haven't seen the entire show, I wouldn't at all be surprised if that's still going to be the end game for this franchise. Still, that wasn't the case for this episode, as things went by insanely fast between Ompu going into her coma, the Ojamajo finding the resolve to sacrifice their magic, and then her waking up, and that was pretty much it. It still did have some great slower moments in between, like the girls saying farewell to their fairies, and spotlighting Majorika's character development. However, after Ompu woke up, the episode just kind of chugged along to the end. Putting aside the unresolved plot points that we'll get to in just a bit, this was clearly more of a transitional episode than anything else, which ultimately makes for just an okay episode on its own, with some really good moments, which is all it really needed to be. The Ojamajo really got to show off the strength of their characters, willingly going back to the bottom after they had just reached the top. This, of course, will be followed up in the next series, which, yes, these reviews will continue right into. But as for my general quick thoughts of this first season, yeah, I thought it was pretty good overall, but I can also see why a lot of people consider this to be the weakest season of the franchise. It certainly ran the gambit of some really good to some really awful episodes, but for now at least, I do think there were a lot more hits than misses. I certainly enjoyed a lot of spotlight episodes for the Ojamajo, though of course, like anyone, I thought Aiko had the best episodes. All of them were consistently great and really highlighted the struggles a divorcee child of her age would go through. Conversely, while Hazuki had some bright spots, she also had some of the worst episodes of the series, including an episode that said kidnappers aren't really all that bad. But yeah, along with Onpu, she was the Ojamajo with the least development, though at least in the case of the latter, she had the excuse of coming in late, and at least this last arc did develop her pretty well for the time they were afforded. The title character of course held the show together with her lovable, idiotic personality. Yeah, Doremi might have made a lot of bold-headed choices, but at least for the most part, her heart was in the right place, and we could at least get some good laughs at her expense, which the series certainly delivered on with some good slapstick. That said, while this was more of a slice-of-life comedy, I do wish the writing was just a little more solid. Yeah, probably the biggest issue with this first season that was still trying to find its legs was how they handled the main plot. Obviously, the main conflict was the Ojamajo achieving their full witchdom with their exams. They went through a lot of trials and tribulations, which was interesting, especially when they found clever ways of circumventing their past failures. However, that wasn't always the case, and sometimes they would just pass through the power of pure plot convenience and would just receive their new rankings while not really reflecting on their past failings and learning from them. It wasn't totally poorly done, but there were some definite weak spots. Still, at least it wasn't as bad as the bad card subplot. While it started off interestingly enough with a ton of world and lore building for the show, it soon fizzled out, and by the end, the cards just felt like they were tagged onto episodes that didn't really need them. Not helped by the fact that a lot of them featured one of the worst characters ever in the show. Now, I have heard that later seasons will resolve this, as well as give a little more for Oyashi, but at least for this first season, it felt like the most superfluous of side quests. Even if they had planned to make this episode the grand finale, I don't know how they would have been able to effectively resolve this, so thankfully, they were given a lot more episodes to deal with this, as well as some other purposely unresolved plot points, like learning more about the Queen and the fact that her VA cred has a big question mark to it, as well as a certain AWOL fairy. And while the main plot wasn't great, a lot of the individual episodes about the Ojamajo's classmates were pretty solid, with some even managing to stand out like Reika and Masaru. Sure, not everything was perfect, as some classmates were outright infuriating or just plain boring, but at least the main characters managed to stand out more as a result. There is a lot more I could say about the season, but I think we should start wrapping up. So overall, this was a very solid start to the franchise, definitely shaky in a lot of areas with a disorganized main plot and maybe one too many characters, but I can still feel the effort that went into this quirky little magical girl anime that still holds a place in many otaku's hearts to the point that it's even parodied in some of the more popular shows of today. The story of the Ojamajo has only just begun, and you can definitely count us in for the ride. Hopefully, this video will be out on Sunday. I mean, I wanted to give y'all at least something to enjoy while Toei does some reorganizing of their own. The regular Wednesday schedule will resume this week with PPGZ and Doremi Sharp the following, and we will try to put out some sort of Sunday video. Good thing I've been sleepy on this one for a rainy day. So, look forward to all of that. Until then, though, farewell for now, my friends, and, hold on. Hello? My bar tab from, Thursday? I think you have the wrong number. It doesn't count if you can't remember, right?